By 7:38 on Monday morning, Old Quarry Road was no longer a shortcut. It was a jam of brake lights, blaring horns, delivery vans, contractor trucks, and angry commuters trapped behind the steel barrier I had lowered across the dirt road behind my house, the same dirt road the HOA had been charging people to use. I stood beside the locked gate with my phone recording in one hand and a folder of county records under my arm. Behind me, the little wooden toll booth still sat on my land, with its crooked sign hanging from the window. The Cedar Ridge Express Access $5 cash, $7 card. That was when Marcia Bell, the Cedar Ridge HOA president, came storming toward me. Her face was red, her eyes were wide, and her finger shook as she pointed at my chest. She screamed that I had created a traffic emergency, that I was holding the neighborhood hostage, and that her attorney would bury me before lunch. Then she slapped the hood of my truck so hard the metal popped. I did not yell back. I did not touch her. I just let my camera record every threat, every horn behind her, and every dollar sign still hanging from the illegal booth her board had built on my private property. Marcia kept shouting that this was an HOA access road. She said hundreds of people depended on it, as she said I had no right to shut it down during rush hour. But Old Quarry Road was not public. It was not HOA property. It was not a community easement. It was my road inside my surveyed parcel, on land my father had cleared before Cedar Ridge Estates even existed. When the sheriff's cruiser rolled up behind the last car in line, Marcia smiled like she had won. What she did not know was that I had called him myself. And when county code enforcement arrived right behind him, that little toll booth was about to become the most expensive mistake the Cedar Ridge HOA had ever made. Before that Monday morning turned my dirt road into the most crowded place in the county. I was not the kind of man people talked about at HOA meetings. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 42 years old. I fixed small engines and farm equipment for a living, and I lived in a plain one-story house at the edge of Cedar Ridge Estates, just far enough from the subdivision to hear crickets at night instead of garage doors and leaf blowers. The house was not fancy. The paint on the back porch was fading, the gravel driveway always needed another load, and the roof had a few shingles that looked tired every time a storm rolled in. But it was mine. More than that, it had been my parents' place before it became mine. My father bought the land back when that side of the county was mostly pasture. The pine trees and one narrow road leading toward an old stone quarry. He was the one who carved Old Quarry Road through the back of the property, with a borrowed tractor, a rusted box blade, and more patience than money. He did not build it for traffic. He built it so he could haul firewood, bring in fencing, reach the back acreage, and get emergency vehicles close to the house if anything ever happened. My mother planted the first row of crepe myrtles along the road because she hated how bare the land looked after the grading. Every spring, those trees turned pink and white over the dust. And every year, my father said, the road looked less like a work path and more like a promise that the place would last. After they were gone, that road became one of the few things I refused to change. The Old Quarry Road was not beautiful in the way developers like things to be beautiful. It was uneven, dusty, and stubborn. In July, it kicked up powder that coated your boots in February. It held rainwater in shallow ruts that made delivery drivers curse under their breath. But I knew every dip in it. I knew where the gravel washed out, where the drainage ditch needed clearing, and where my father had buried an old culvert after a storm almost flooded the back shed. To other people, it was just a shortcut. To me, it was part of the property line, part of my family history, and part of the quiet life I had worked hard to protect. When Cedar Ridge Estates was built next door, I tried to be reasonable. I did not join the protests some older landowners talked about. I did not complain about the construction noise, even when dump trucks started rolling before sunrise. I did not get angry when survey flags appeared along the edge of my fence. I understood that towns grow, families move in, and empty fields do not stay empty forever. For the first few years, the HOA and I mostly ignored each other. Their world was brick mailboxes, trimmed lawns, matching roof colors, and newsletters about approved mulch. My world was oil-stained work shirts, a dog that slept under the porch, and a road I dragged smooth myself after heavy rain. Then the subdivision's main entrance started getting repaired. At first, it was harmless. A woman from Cedar Ridge stopped by one afternoon and asked if she could use Old Quarry Road for a few days to get her kids to school while the entrance was torn up. She looked embarrassed to ask, and I told her it was fine as long as she drove slow and did not make a habit of it. Then another neighbor asked. Then a delivery driver came through. Then a contractor truck. I let it slide longer than I should have, because I knew road work was frustrating, and because I still believed people would treat a favor like a favor. That was my first mistake. In a month, Old Quarry Road was no longer a temporary favor. It was a morning route. Cars rolled through before I had finished my coffee. Subs flew past the crepe myrtles fast enough to shake dust onto the porch. Delivery vans used the road to skip the stoplight by the subdivision entrance. Contractors pulling trailers left deep ruts in the soft shoulders. Strangers slowed down in front of my house and stared like I was the inconvenience, not the owner. I started waking up to headlights sweeping across my bedroom wall. My dog stopped sleeping under the porch because the traffic made him nervous. The drainage ditch my father had dug by hand began collapsing, where tires kept riding the edge. Every evening I walked the road with a shovel, filling holes I had not made for people who never waved when they passed. Still, I tried to handle it like an adult. I emailed the Cedar Ridge HOA and explained that Old Quarry Road was private property, not an access road for the neighborhood. I attached a photo of the deed page, marked the parcel boundary, and asked them to remind residents not to use it unless they had my permission. I expected a simple apology, maybe a notice to the neighborhood, maybe nothing more than a little embarrassment. What I got back was a polished message from Marcia, the HOA president, telling me that the road had become a practical community access route, and that limiting it would be disruptive to residents who had come to rely on it. That was the first time I realized. Cedar Ridge did not see my kindness as permission. They saw it as weakness, and if you have ever had an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone with a little clipboard power act like your property rights are just an obstacle to their convenience, you already know the feeling. Leave your thoughts in the comments when you hear this, because too many people do not realize how fast a small favor can turn into someone else claiming control over what belongs to you. I should have shut it down right then, but I still wanted peace. I still wanted to believe this could be solved with paperwork, clear boundaries, and one reasonable conversation. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I came home from a repair job and saw a wooden booth standing at the entrance to Old Quarry Road. It had a painted sign, a yellow arm gate, a security guard, and a price list. $5 cash, $7 card, and it was sitting on my land. At first, I thought I was looking at a mistake. The wooden booth was sitting just off the edge of Old Quarry Road, close enough to the entrance that every vehicle coming from Cedar Ridge had to slow down before reaching it. It had fresh plywood walls, a little sliding window, a plastic roof panel, and 2 orange cones placed like someone had decided. My dirt road was suddenly a construction zone. A portable card reader sat on the counter inside. A small generator hummed behind it. A yellow and black arm gate stretched across the road, like it had every right to be there. For a few seconds, I just sat in my truck with the engine running, trying to make my brain accept what my eyes were seeing. Then I saw the sign, Cedar Ridge, Express Access, $5 cash, $7 card, under that in smaller letters. It said, all funds supported road maintenance and community traffic management. I stepped out slowly. Not because I was calm, but because I knew if I moved too fast, I might say something I could not take back. There were 2 men fastening a post into the ground near the ditch. One of them had already poured a collar of wet concrete around it. The other was tightening bolts on the hinge of the arm gate. The security guard in a black polo shirt stood beside the booth with a clipboard, watching me like I was the trespasser. That was the first thing that hit me hard, not the booth. Not the sign, not even the price list. It was the way they all looked at me on my own land, like I was interrupting their work. I asked, who authorized the construction? The guard did not even look at the deed folder I had pulled from my truck. He just said the HOA had approved the access station, and that any questions had to go through the Cedar Ridge board. Access station. That was what they were calling it. Not a toll booth. Not an illegal structure. Not a box collecting money from strangers on a private road. An access station, as if changing the words could change the property line. A few minutes later, Marcia Bell arrived in a white suit with the Cedar Ridge HOA logo on a magnetic sign stuck to the door. She did not rush. She did not look surprised. She stepped out holding a tablet, wearing sunglasses, and smiling like she had come to inspect a project she already owned. Two other board members followed her, one carrying a folder and the other recording on his phone. That was when I realized this had not been done quietly by a confused contractor. This was planned. Marcia walked past the booth, glanced at the wet concrete, and told the workers it looked good. Then she turned to me and explained, in the stiff voice people use when they want to sound official, that Cedar Ridge had decided to manage the shortcut because traffic had become too heavy to leave unregulated. Shortcut. That one word told me everything to her. Old Quarry Road was not my land. It was not the road my father had cut with a tractor. It was not the place my mother had planted trees. It was just a convenience the HOA had found, used and now intended to control. I told her the booth had to come down. I told her the road was private property. I told her nobody had permission to pour concrete, install a gate, collect fees, or direct traffic on my land. Marcia did not get angry at first. She smiled wider, which was worse. She said the board understood my concerns, but the neighborhood had developed a reliance on the route. She said shutting it down would create unnecessary hardship. She said the fee was not really a toll, only a maintenance contribution, and that I should be grateful the HOA was finally taking responsibility for the wear and tear. That almost made me laugh. For weeks, I had been the one filling ruts. I had been the one clearing trash out of the ditch. I had been the one watching dust settle over my porch and tire tracks chew into the shoulder. Now the same people causing the damage had built a booth to charge other people for the privilege of causing more. I told Marcia she had 24 hours to remove everything from my property. That was when the smile disappeared. She lowered her tablet, stepped closer, and told me I needed to be careful. She said Cedar Ridge had attorneys, insurance, a management company, and a board budget that could handle a dispute like this for years. She reminded me that I was one property owner, while she represented hundreds of residents. She said the courts did not look kindly on people who interfered with community access. The security guard shifted behind her. One of the board members kept recording. A contractor pretended not to listen while smoothing concrete around a post sunk into my dirt. I looked around at all of them and understood the message perfectly. They were not asking. They were not negotiating. They were daring me to stop them. By the next morning, the booth was operating. Cars came through before sunrise. The guard stood at the window with a card reader and a cash box. Some drivers looked annoyed, but most paid because they thought the HOA had authority to charge them. A few waved receipts on their dashboards like they were entering a parking garage. Contractor trucks paid and rolled through. Delivery vans paid and rolled through. Parents taking kids to school paid and rolled through. Every paid vehicle threw more dust across my yard. Around 8:15. I pulled my truck toward the entrance because I needed to leave for a repair job outside town. The guard stepped in front of my bumper and raised one hand. He did not recognize me, or maybe he did and had been told not to care. He pointed at the sign, then at the card reader. For a moment, I could not even speak. I was being asked to pay $5 to drive across my own land. Not by the county, not by a court, not by anyone with legal authority. By a private security guard hired by an HOA that did not own 1 inch of the road beneath his shoes. I backed up instead of arguing. I turned around in my own driveway, took the longer route through the county road, and forced myself to breathe all the way into town. That was the moment my frustration changed into something colder and more useful. By Friday afternoon, the HOA sent me a formal notice by email. It accused me of interfering with an established community access route. It warned that any attempt to block, damage, disable, or obstruct the toll booth would result in daily fines, legal action, and possible claims for traffic disruption. The notice had the Cedar Ridge logo at the top and Marcia's digital signature at the bottom. I saved it immediately. That evening, I checked the camera mounted above my workshop. It had a clear view of the road entrance. The footage showed everything. Workers unloading the booth. concrete being poured, the gate being attached, the guard collecting money, cars being turned away when they refused to pay, and just before sunset, Marcia opening the cash box, counting bills and sliding them into a blue hoe deposit pouch. Then came the part that made my stomach tighten. The camera audio caught her standing beside the booth with the guard, saying Monday morning would be their real test because rush hour would prove how much the neighborhood needed the access point. Needed it, not requested it, not borrowed it, needed it. That was the word she planned to use against me. Over the weekend, people in the neighborhood group started posting about the road. Some complained about the fee, but others blamed me. One person said I should stop being difficult because the shortcut helped everyone. Another called my land a useless strip of dirt that only mattered because the HOA had improved it. Someone else wrote that if I did not want community traffic, I should not have bought property next to a subdivision. Marcia did not correct them. She encouraged them. She posted that the board was working hard to preserve access and that certain outside owners needed to respect the needs of the community. She never used my name, but everyone knew who she meant. That was how she tried to trap me. First with traffic, then with money, then with public pressure. But she made one mistake. She did all of it in writing. She did all of it on camera. And she did all of it on land she had never bothered to check. I did not take a hammer to the booth. I did not drag the gate out with my truck. I did not scream at the guard or threaten the contractors. I made 3 copies of the footage, downloaded every email, photographed every sign, saved every post, and placed the HOA notice in the same folder as my deed. Then I called a land use attorney, and by the time he finished reading what Marcia had sent me, his voice went quiet in a way that told me this was no longer just a neighborhood argument. The first thing my attorney told me was not to touch the booth. That was harder than it sounds. Every time I looked out my kitchen window and saw cars slowing down beside that little wooden box. Every time I heard the generator humming on land my father had cleared. Every time dust rolled across my porch because another driver had paid the HOA to use my road. I wanted to walk out there and tear the whole thing apart board by board. That anger was exactly what Marcia wanted from me. If I damaged the booth, she could call me unstable. If I blocked the road without notice, she could call it reckless. If I yelled at the security guard, she could record 10 seconds of it and use that clip to make me look like the problem. The HOA had already started building a story where they were the organized community, and I was the unreasonable outsider standing in everyone's way. So I did the one thing they did not expect. I got quiet. I stopped answering Marcia's emails except through my attorney. I stopped posting in the neighborhood group. I stopped arguing with drivers who looked annoyed when they passed my house. Instead, I started documenting everything like I was preparing for court, because at that point I knew I probably was every morning. I wrote down the time the first car came through. I counted vehicles in 15-minute blocks. I saved clips from the workshop camera, the porch camera, and the small trail camera I had mounted near the drainage ditch months earlier to watch for deer. That trail camera turned out to be more useful than I ever imagined, because it caught the contractor's truck backing onto my shoulder, the workers unloading concrete mix, and one of them kicking loose gravel into the ditch before setting the gate post. I photographed the tire ruts. I photographed the dust on the porch rail. I photographed the crushed edge of the ditch where heavy trucks kept riding too far over. I took pictures of the toll booth from every angle, including the sign, the card reader, the generator, the cash box, the cones, the arm gate, and the wet concrete that had hardened around the posts. Then I printed every email, Marcia's first message calling Old Quarry Road, a practical community access route, the HOA notice accusing me of interference, the warning about daily fines, the message to residents saying the board would preserve access, the group post where she called me an outside owner, even though my family had owned that land long before Cedar Ridge was drawn on a developer S map. I put every page into a binder with dates written in black marker across the top. After that, I went to the county recorder's office. The clerk behind the counter was an older woman who had probably seen every kind of property dispute the county could produce. When I gave her my parcel number and asked for the recorded deed, the plat map, and any easements tied to Old Quarry Road, She gave me a look that said she already knew this was going to be ugly. An hour later, I was sitting at a metal table under fluorescent lights. Spreading old records across the surface, the deed was clear. My parcel included the full stretch of Old Quarry Road from the county road entrance to the back acreage. The plat map showed the same thing. There was no dedication to public use, no transfer to Cedar Ridge, no HOA maintenance agreement, no right-of-way for residents. There was only one easement. It was an old utility and emergency access easement. It recorded years before the subdivision existed. It allowed power company trucks, emergency vehicles, and county-approved utility crews to enter if necessary. It did not allow commuters to skip traffic. It did not allow a homeowners association to collect money. It did not allow a booth, a gate, a guard, a card reader, or a line of angry drivers cutting across my land every morning. I took certified copies of everything. Then I hired a licensed surveyor. He came out the next day with his equipment, orange stakes, and a calm expression that made me trust him immediately. He did not care about Marcia. He did not care about the HOA. He did not care who was angry or who had the bigger budget. He cared about recorded lines, measurements, and markers in the ground. For 3 hours, he measured the entrance, the ditch, the roadbed, and the booth location. Cars slowed down to stare. The security guard called someone on his phone. Marcia drove by once. Rolled down her window and watched from the subdivision side, like she was trying to intimidate the survey equipment. The surveyor never looked up. When he finished, he walked me to the booth and pointed at one of the orange stakes. The structure was not barely over the line. It was not sitting in some confusing gray area. The booth was 18 feet inside my property. The gate post was sunk into my land. The cones were on my land. The generator was on my land. Even the little sign telling people to have payment ready was on my land. That single measurement changed the way I breathed. For weeks, Marcia had acted like this was a debate. Like if she spoke loudly enough, my property line would become flexible. But a survey does not care who has the louder voice. A line is a line. My attorney also checked the county permit records. There was no building permit for the booth, no temporary structure approval, no traffic control permit, no commercial access permit, no county authorization for a private HOA to collect fees from vehicles crossing that road. Then we found the part that made his pen stop moving in the HOA's own meeting minutes. That Marcia had discussed Old Quarry Road months earlier. A resident had asked whether the HOA actually owned the shortcut. Marcia had answered that the ownership issue was complicated, but that if residents used the road regularly enough, the owner would have a hard time cutting off access later. That was not confusion, that was strategy. Another board member suggested calling the fee a maintenance contribution instead of a toll. Someone else asked whether they should contact me first. Marcia said reaching out would only invite resistance before the system was in place. I read that line 3 times, before the system was in place. They had not made a mistake. They had not misunderstood an old map. They had not accidentally hired a contractor who built in the wrong location. They knew I had not agreed. They knew they did not have paperwork. They decided it would be easier to create the appearance of authority first and deal with me after the neighborhood had already become dependent on the road. That was the legal crack in the wall. My attorney told me we were not going to threaten. We were not going to bluff. We were going to give proper written notice, preserve emergency access, notify the sheriff's office in advance, and close my private road in the cleanest, most documented way possible. So I ordered a steel barrier from a fabricator I knew through work. Not a trap, not a hidden chain, not anything dangerous. A visible, reflective, properly installed gate placed exactly where the surveyor marked my boundary. We added warning signs, reflective tape, and a lock rated for commercial farm use. Then my attorney sent a certified letter to the HOA. It demanded that they stop collecting fees, remove the booth, restore the damaged shoulder, correct their statements to residents, and cease claiming any access rights over Old Quarry Road. It included copies of the deed, the survey, the easement language, and photographs of the booth. We also sent copies to the sheriff's office, county road department, and code enforcement. For 72 hours, I left the signs up at both ends of the road. Private road closing Monday at 7:30 a.m., no public access. Emergency access maintained. Cars still came through, drivers still paid. Marcia still ignored the letter, and every time another vehicle passed, another camera recorded it. By Sunday night, the binder on my kitchen table was so full the rings barely closed. Deed, survey, photos, emails, notices, meeting minutes, screenshots, camera stills, permit searches, and the certified mail receipts proving the HOA had been warned. I looked at that binder for a long time before I went to bed. For the first time since the booth appeared, I did not feel powerless, because I finally understood the difference between being quiet and doing nothing. I had been quiet, but I had not done nothing. And Monday morning, Marcia Bell was going to learn that the hard way. At 7:29 on Monday morning, I stood at the edge of Old Quarry Road, with one hand on the steel barrier, and the other wrapped around the folder I had spent all weekend building. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath. The generator behind the HOA booth was already running. The little card reader on the counter glowed blue in the dim morning light. A security guard sat inside with a paper cup of coffee, probably expecting another profitable rush hour. The warning signs had been up for 3 days. Private road, closing Monday at 7:30 a.m., no public access. Emergency access maintained. They were not hidden. They were not small. They were posted at the county road entrance, at the edge of the subdivision, and beside the booth itself, I had photos showing each one in place. I had certified mail receipts showing the HOA had been notified. I had emails proving Marcia had received the letter and ignored it. At exactly 7:30, I lowered the steel bar. It came down slowly, a heavy metallic sound that cut through the morning like a judge's gavel. The first driver to reach it was a man in a silver SUV with a Cedar Ridge parking sticker on his windshield. He stopped, stared at the barrier, then leaned on his horn. A delivery van pulled up behind him. Then a landscaping truck, then 2 minivans. Within minutes, the line stretched around the bend toward the subdivision. The security guard came out of the booth with his phone already in his hand. He told me I needed to open the gate because people had paid for access. I told him nobody had the right to sell access to land they did not own. He said the HOA would have me arrested. I told him to make the call. By 7:38, Marcia Bell arrived like a storm wrapped in a navy blazer. She jumped out of her SUV before it was fully parked, marched straight toward me, and started yelling before she reached the barrier. She said I was creating a traffic emergency. She said children were going to be late for school. She said residents could lose their jobs because of my selfishness. She said the HOA's attorney would be filing an emergency injunction before the morning was over. Then she pointed at the steel bar and ordered me to raise it. Ordered me on my land. I kept my phone recording. The workshop camera was recording. The trail camera was recording. My attorney had told me that when people realize they are losing control, they often say the most useful things on camera. Marcia did exactly that. She shouted that the road belonged to the community now because the community had been using it. She said the HOA had improved it, managed it, protected it, and created a system residents depended on. She said I had waited until the busiest possible time because I wanted to punish innocent people. That last part made several drivers start yelling at me too. For a moment, I could feel the pressure of all those eyes. People sitting behind windshields, angry and late, not knowing the whole story to them. I probably looked like the bitter man with the old dirt road who had decided to ruin everyone's morning. That was the trap Marcia had built. She wanted a crowd. She wanted noise. She wanted me surrounded by frustration so she could turn a property dispute into a public relations crisis. But I had built something, too, a record. When the sheriff's cruiser rolled up behind the line of cars, Marcia smiled. She stepped away from me and hurried toward the deputy like she was greeting her rescuer. She told him I had blocked a neighborhood access road and was refusing to let residents leave for work and school. The deputy listened. He looked at the traffic. He looked at the barrier. Then he looked at me. I handed him the folder, not all of it, just the front section. Deed, survey, easement language, a certified notice, photos of the posted signs, a printed map from the county road department showing Old Quarry Road was not public. The deputy read quietly while Marcia kept talking. That was the first time the morning changed. Because the louder she got, the more official those documents looked in his hands. He asked me where the property line was. I pointed to the orange stakes the surveyor had left behind. He asked whether emergency access was still available. I showed him the separate locked lane that remained clear for sheriff, fire, ambulance, utility, and county-approved use under the recorded easement. He asked whether I had notified the HOA before closing the private road. I gave him the certified mail receipt. Then he turned to Marcia and asked for her documentation showing the HOA's right to operate the road. She blinked. For the first time all morning, she did not have an instant answer. She said the road had been commonly used. The deputy asked if she had a recorded easement. She said the HOA maintained the route. He asked if she had a maintenance agreement signed by the landowner. She said residents depended on it. He asked if she had county dedication documents proving it was public. Her face tightened with every question. Then county code enforcement pulled in. Marcia's expression changed when she saw the inspector step out with a clipboard. She had expected a sheriff. She had not expected a second agency. She had definitely not expected the county road department truck that arrived. A few minutes later, my attorney had not come to argue. He had come to watch everyone else confirm the obvious. The code enforcement officer walked straight to the booth. He photographed the structure, the concrete posts, the generator, the arm gate, the card reader, the sign, and the cash box visible through the window. He asked Marcia for the permit number. She said it was a temporary access station. He asked again for the permit number. She said the HOA had authority over community traffic. He said Community Traffic Authority did not allow an HOA to build a structure on private land without approval. The county road official then confirmed Old Quarry Road was not part of the county road system. It had never been dedicated. It had never been accepted for public maintenance. It was not listed as an official public access route. The only recorded easement was for utilities and emergency services. That was the moment the crowd began to quiet down. Drivers who had been honking lowered their windows to listen. A few stepped out of their cars. The security guard stopped pacing and stood near the booth like he wanted to disappear behind it. Marcia tried to save herself by changing the language. She said the $5 fee was not a toll. It was a voluntary maintenance donation. I opened my folder to the next section and handed my attorney the printed photos. One showed the booth sign, $5 cash, $7 card. One showed the guard turning a car away when the driver refused to pay. One showed the receipt template labeled Cedar Ridge Express Access. Then I played the video from Friday morning. On the screen, the guard stood in front of my own truck and told me clearly that no vehicle could pass without payment. Nobody spoke while the video played. Not Marcia, not the guard, not the board member who had shown up halfway through and was now standing near her with his arms crossed tight against his chest. Then my attorney produced the last page, a copy of the HOA's internal financial report, the one a frustrated resident had forwarded to me late Sunday night after realizing something was wrong. In the revenue section, under special projects, there it was in plain text. Shortcut access revenue, not donations, revenue. The code enforcement officer looked at that line, then at the booth, then at Marcia. He asked who authorized the collection of revenue from a structure placed on property the HOA did not own. Marcia opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all the sharp edges. She said there may have been a misunderstanding about the parcel boundary. She said the contractor should have verified placement. She said the board had acted in good faith. That was when my attorney quietly handed over the HOA meeting minutes. The ones where Marcia said contacting me first would invite resistance before the system was in place. The deputy read the highlighted line. The inspector read it after him. Then both of them looked at Marcia. There are moments in life when you can actually feel power shift, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet tilt in the air. 5 minutes earlier, Marcia had been the HOA president demanding obedience in front of a crowd. Now she was a woman standing beside an unpermitted toll booth on someone else's land, with county officials reading her own words back to her. The inspector placed a notice on the booth window. Stop use order. The county road official told the security guard no further access fees were to be collected. The deputy told Marcia that unless she could produce a court order or recorded access right, she had no authority to force me to open my private gate. Marcia looked at the line of cars, then back at me. For the first time since this started, she did not tell me what she was going to do to me. She took out her phone and called the HOA attorney. Once the stop-use order went onto the toll booth window, the whole morning changed shape. The line of cars was still there. People were still late, engines were still running, and a few drivers were still angry enough to shout through their windows. But the focus was no longer on me standing beside a locked steel barrier. Now everyone was looking at the booth. The same booth Marcia had presented as an organized HOA solution suddenly looked different with a county notice taped across its window. The same yellow arm gate that had made the road feel official now looked like evidence. The same handwritten cash receipts that had seemed harmless to residents were being photographed by code enforcement. The deputy asked the security guard for his name, his employer, and who instructed him to deny passage to vehicles that did not pay. The guard's confidence disappeared fast. He kept glancing at Marcia before answering, as if she could still protect him from the fact that he had been collecting money on land his company had no right to control. The code enforcement officer walked the site with a camera. He photographed the concrete collars around the posts. He photographed the generator. He photographed the payment sign. Then he stepped into the ditch line and pointed to the damaged shoulder where truck tires had broken the edge down into loose dirt. He asked who authorized excavation and installation on the property. Marcia said the contractor handled placement. The contractor, who had arrived after being called by one of the board members, immediately shook his head and said the HOA gave him the location. He said Marcia told him the road was under community management and that the landowner had been notified. My attorney asked him if he had a signed authorization from me. The contractor looked at me, then at the deputy, then back at Marcia. He did not answer. That silence did more damage than any argument could have. By mid-morning, the sheriff's office had a report number. The code enforcement had opened a violation file. The county road department had confirmed in writing that Old Quarry Road was not a public road. My attorney had enough documentation to send a formal demand letter before the end of the day. Marcia kept trying to pull the situation back into HOA language. She said this was a misunderstanding between neighbors. She said the board's intention had always been maintenance. She said the access program was created for safety because the subdivision entrance had become congested, but every agency standing there dealt in records, not intentions. The deed said the road was mine. The survey said the booth was 18 feet inside my parcel. The permit search said there was no approval. The easement said emergency and utility access only. The sign said $5 cash. The $7 card. The financial report said revenue. There was nowhere left for her to hide. That evening, my attorney sent the demand letter to Cedar Ridge HOA, their management company, their insurance carrier, the contractor, and the private security company. It required the immediate removal of the booth, restoration of the road shoulder, repair of the drainage damage, the reimbursement for the survey, reimbursement for initial legal fees, preservation of all payment records, and a written correction to every resident stating that Old Quarry Road was private property. The letter also demanded that the HOA stop telling residents they had any right to use the road. The next day, Cedar Ridge called an emergency board meeting. I did not want to go. Part of me wanted to stay home, lock the gate, and let my attorney handle everything. But he told me it mattered for residents to see the evidence directly, because Marcia had spent weeks making me look like the villain. So I went. The meeting room at the clubhouse was packed. People stood along the walls with folded arms and irritated faces. Some were still angry about Monday morning. Some had paid the toll for days and wanted their money back. Others looked embarrassed because they had posted things about me online without knowing the truth. Marcia sat at the front table with the rest of the board. But she did not look like the same woman who had yelled at me beside the barrier. Her blazer was still perfect. Her papers were still stacked neatly in front of her. But her face had that tight, pale look people get when confidence turns into damage control. She opened by saying the HOA had acted in good faith. My attorney stood up and placed the survey on the screen. Then he showed the deed, then the easement, then the county road confirmation, then the permit search showing no approval for the booth. Nobody interrupted him. The room grew quieter with every document. When he played the video of the guard stopping my truck and demanding payment for me to cross my own land, someone in the back whispered, "Are you serious?" Then he showed the meeting minutes, where Marcia said contacting me first would invite resistance before the system was in place. That was the moment the room turned. A resident stood up and asked Marcia if the board knew the road was private before the booth was built. Another asked why toll money had been listed as HOA revenue. A third asked whether their dues were now going to pay for a lawsuit the board created by ignoring property records. The treasurer looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. A Contractor S representative, who had been invited to explain the installation, said their company had relied on the HOA S written work order. The security company representative said their guards had been instructed by the HOA to collect the listed fee and deny access to unpaid vehicles. One by one, everyone who had helped build Marcia S' system began stepping away from her. That was the most satisfying part. Not because people were yelling, not because anyone was humiliated for entertainment, but because the truth had become too heavy for anyone to keep carrying on her behalf. Marcia tried once more to say I had chosen rush hour to create maximum disruption. My attorney calmly reminded the room that I had given 72 hours of written notice, preserved emergency access, notified the sheriff, and placed the barrier only on my surveyed property line. Then he looked at the board and said the HOA had 3 options: resolve the matter voluntarily, turn it over to insurance, or explain the entire thing in court with county records already in the file. Nobody spoke for several seconds. After the meeting, the first person to approach me was not Marcia. It was an older resident named Mr. Donnelly, who had driven through my road almost every morning for 2 weeks. He told me he had honestly believed the HOA had permission. Then he apologized for using the road. That apology meant more than he probably knew. By the end of the week, the HOA's insurance attorney contacted mine. The tone was completely different from Marcia's threats. No more talk about community dependence. No more claims that I was obstructing access. No more warnings about daily fines, just negotiation. And for the first time since that booth appeared on my land, Cedar Ridge was not asking what I was going to allow. They were asking what it would cost to make it right. The settlement did not happen in one dramatic phone call. It happened the way most real consequences happen. Slowly in emails, invoices, inspection reports, insurance letters, and quiet meetings where people who once sounded powerful suddenly became very careful with every word. First, the booth came down. Not by me, not by my truck, not in the middle of the night. A licensed crew arrived with county approval, removed the yellow arm gate, disconnected the generator, pulled out the payment sign, and dismantled the little wooden structure piece by piece. Code enforcement stood nearby while they worked. So did the Contractor S project manager, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world, when they pulled the concrete collars out of the ground. The damage was worse than it had looked from the surface. The shoulder of the road had been broken down. The drainage ditch had been partly filled with loose gravel, and one of the posts had cracked the edge of an old culvert my father installed years before. The HOA had to pay for all of it. They paid to restore the shoulder. They paid to regrade the entrance. They paid to repair the drainage. They paid my surveyor. They paid part of my attorney S fees. They paid for new private road signs, new reflective markers, and the steel barrier that Marcia had once called illegal in front of half the neighborhood. Then came the refunds. Every resident who had paid the so-called maintenance contribution received a notice explaining that the charge had not been authorized by the landowner, and that Old Quarry Road was private property. The HOA tried to make the wording soft, but my attorney refused to let them hide the truth behind polite phrases. The final version said exactly what needed to be said. Cedar Ridge HOA had no ownership interest, no recorded easement for residential traffic, and no authority to collect access fees on that road. The security company lost its contract with Cedar Ridge. The contractor received a county citation for installing an unpermitted structure without verifying landowner authorization. The management company quietly changed its procedures for approving board projects. because apparently nobody wanted another president with a clipboard turning private land into a revenue stream. As for Marcia Bell, she did not resign gracefully. She sent one last email to the neighborhood claiming she had acted in the best interest of the community. She said the situation had been misrepresented, that outside parties had escalated it, and that the board had been trying to solve a traffic problem. But by then, the residents had seen the documents. They had seen the survey. They had seen the meeting minutes. They had seen the video of a guard demanding $5 from me so I could drive across my own land. And they had seen the line in the financial report that said shortcut access revenue. 2 weeks later, Cedar Ridge held a special meeting. Marcia was removed as HOA president by a vote that was not even close. The new board sent me a formal apology. They withdrew every violation notice. They agreed in writing that Old Quarry Road was not a community access route. They also warned residents that using it without permission could be treated as trespassing, except for lawful emergency or utility access under the recorded easement. After everything was done, the road looked almost like it had before. Almost there was still a steel barrier at the entrance now, painted black with reflective strips across the front. There were new signs that said private road, no public access. The crepe myrtles were still dusty from the mess, but that spring they bloomed anyway, the first morning after the repairs were finished. I sat on my back porch with a cup of coffee and listened. No horns, no engines, no card reader beeping inside a booth. No stranger slowing down to stare at my house, like I was standing in the way of something that belonged to them. Just wind moving through the trees, my mother planted and gravel settling under my boots when I walked the road my father built. I did not win because I yelled louder than Marcia. I did not win because I scared anybody, trapped anybody, or took revenge in some reckless way. I won because I knew where my property line was. I kept records, I saved the emails. I checked the deed. I hired the surveyor. I let the sheriff, the county, and the law speak louder than the HOA ever could. That is the part people forget. Boundaries do not protect themselves. Sometimes you have to mark them, document them, defend them, and refuse to let someone else turn your kindness into their entitlement. So, if you have ever dealt with an HOA, a neighbor, a contractor, or anyone who acted like your property rights were just an inconvenience, let me know what you think in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs the reminder. Though, save it in case you ever need to defend your own boundary. And subscribe for more stories where the quiet person with the paperwork finally gets the last word.